"Don't touch it," she gasped, voice shredded. Mud and blood, mostly blood, painted her dress the color of sin. Jake Morrison, old Jake seen it all, nearly flinched. Not at the wound, a ragged thing just below her ribs, but at the wild animal terror in her eyes. It was what she was guarding that terrified her most. They'd be here soon. The men who did this. 5 riders, and meaner than the desert itself. What they didn't know? She wasn't just protecting herself, but something, someone else. And that quiet kindness she offered a dying jackrabbit last week, that little flicker of good was about to unleash hell on those bastards. They think they're hunting a killer. They're so wrong. Gunshot wounds, knife cuts, broken bones from bucked horses. But something in her voice, the way she said, "please," like it was her last word on earth, made his stomach drop. He stood frozen in his doorway, hat in his hands, watching her try to stand and fail. She was maybe 25, with auburn hair that caught the dying sunlight. Despite being matted with dust and something darker, her dress had once been blue. Now it was the color of dried blood in desert clay. But it wasn't the blood that held his attention. It was how she held herself, protecting something, hiding something, like a wounded animal guarding its most vulnerable spot. "Ma'am, you need help." His voice came out rougher than intended. "Whatever's wrong, I've seen worse." She looked up then, and her eyes were the pale green of winter sage. Fear lived there, but something else too. Shame maybe, or worse, resignation. "No," she breathed. "You haven't." The desert stretched endless around his small cabin, nothing but scrub brush and red rock for miles. No settlements, no neighbors, no law, just him and his horses. And now this broken woman who'd appeared like a mirage made flesh. She'd walked here, had to have, but from where? The nearest town was 30 mi of hard riding through country that killed strong men. She tried to push herself upright again, using the cabin wall for support. Her legs shook like a newborn colt's. Whatever she was hiding beneath that blood-soaked fabric, it was bad enough to make her choose dying alone over accepting help. "I can make it stop," she whispered, though her hands trembled so violently she could barely maintain pressure on the wound. "I just need somewhere quiet." The sun was setting fast, painting the desert the color of dried blood. Night brought coyotes, cold that could kill, and worse things that prowled the darkness between settlements. She wouldn't last an hour alone, but something in her desperate refusal made Jake hesitate. In 20 years of frontier living, he'd learned to read people the way he read weather. This woman wasn't just hurt, she was terrified of being seen. Jake had 2 choices: honor her wishes and watch her die, or force help on a woman who clearly had reasons for refusing it. Neither felt right. "Look, miss, don't." Her voice cut sharp as broken glass. "Please, I'm begging you." She slumped further against the doorframe, leaving a red smear on the weathered wood. Her breathing came shallow and fast, the kind that meant blood loss, shock, maybe worse. But her eyes never left his face, searching for something, understanding maybe, or mercy. "I got medical supplies inside," Jake said carefully. "Clean bandages, whiskey for cleaning wounds. You don't have to tell me nothing. Don't have to show me nothing. But you're going to die out here if you don't get help." She closed her eyes, and for a moment he thought she'd passed out. Then she spoke so quiet he almost missed it. "You'll think I'm a monster." The words hit him like a physical blow. Whatever this woman was hiding, it had convinced her she was something less than human, something unworthy of basic compassion. In his years alone on the frontier, Jake had met killers, thieves, and worse. But he'd never met anyone who looked at themselves with such complete revulsion. "I don't know you well enough to think anything," he said, "but I know dying ain't gonna solve whatever's eating at you." A coyote howled in the distance, answered by another. The desert was waking up hungry. She opened her eyes again, and this time there was something different in them. Not hope. She was too far gone for that. But maybe the faintest possibility that hope might exist somewhere? "If I let you help," she whispered, "you have to promise me something. Depends what it is. Promise you won't tell anyone. Not ever." No matter what you see, Jake studied her face, trying to read the story written in her fear. Whatever secret she carried, it had driven her into the desert to die rather than seek help from anyone who might discover it. That kind of shame didn't come from ordinary wounds. "I promise," he said finally. Relief flooded her features, followed immediately by fresh terror. "I don't know if I can show you." "Then don't tell me what to do, and I'll do it with my eyes closed if need be." But even as he said it, Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert evening. Something in her expression suggested that wasn't going to be possible. Thunder rumbled in the distance, not a storm, but hoof beats. Multiple riders moving fast across hard-packed earth. The sound of approaching horses sent ice through Jake's veins. Out here, riders at sunset meant one of three things: trouble, trouble, or worse, trouble. The woman heard it too. Her face went white as bone. "China, they found me," she breathed. Jake counted hoof beats in his head. 4 horses, maybe 5, riding hard but not reckless. Men who knew the desert knew how to track, the kind who didn't give up easy. "Who found you?" But even as he asked, Jake was moving, pulling the woman inside the cabin and barring the door. Through the window, dust clouds rose against the darkening sky like smoke signals. "Bounty hunters," she whispered. Or worse, Jake's rifle leaned against the wall beside his bed. His Colt hung on the chair where he'd left it. Enough firepower to handle 4 men if he was lucky, if they were careless, if they didn't know the country better than he did. But the woman in his cabin changed everything. She could barely stand, let alone run. "What did you do?" he asked, checking his weapons. She was silent so long he thought she wouldn't answer. "Then I lived when I should have died." The hoof beats were getting closer. Jake could make out individual riders now. Dark shapes against the red horizon, moving with the steady purpose of men following a trail. They tracked her here, blood drops and footprints leading straight to his door. "There's a root cellar," Jake said, "under the floorboards by the stove. You can hide." "No!" The word came out sharp. "Final, I'm tired of hiding." She tried to stand, swayed, caught herself against the table. Blood had soaked through her makeshift bandages, spreading dark across the blue fabric of her dress. Whatever wound she carried, it was killing her slow. "They'll take me back," she said. "Do things worse than death." Jake had heard stories. Bounty hunters who brought back their quarry alive when they could, dead when they couldn't, and didn't much care about the condition either way. Some had reputations that made decent folks cross the street rather than meet their eyes. The riders were close enough now that Jake could hear leather creaking, spurs jingling, the low murmur of men discussing strategy. They'd surround the cabin first, cut off escape routes, then demand he hand over their prize. "Listen," Jake said, moving to the window. "I don't know what you've done or what you're running from, but no woman deserves to be dragged back to something worse than death." She looked at him with those pale green eyes, and for the first time, something like gratitude flickered in their depths. "You don't understand," she whispered. "When you see what I am, you'll want to hand me over yourself." The hoofbeats stopped. In the sudden silence, Jake could hear his own heartbeat, the woman's labored breathing, and the soft whisper of men dismounting outside his cabin. A voice called out, rough and confident. "Morrison, we know she's in there. Send her out and nobody gets hurt." Jake didn't answer the voice outside. Instead, he turned to the woman who had gone rigid as a trapped animal. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "Clara." The name came out like a confession. "Clara Whitman." "Well, Clara Whitman, I got a choice to make. I can open that door and let them take you, or I can tell them to go to hell. But before I decide, I need to know. Are you a killer?" She met his eyes without flinching. "Yes." The simple honesty of it hit him harder than any lie would have. Most folks who killed tried to justify it, explain it away. Clara Ara just owned it. "Who? My husband," her voice was steady now, accepting, and his brother and the sheriff who helped them outside. Boots scraped against wood. The bounty hunters were positioning themselves around the cabin, patient as wolves. "They hurt you?" Jake asked, though he already knew the answer. Clara Ara's hand moved to her ribs where the blood was, but then it drifted lower to her stomach, and Jake understood, with dawning horror, what kind of wound she was hiding. "Every night for 3 years," she whispered, "until I couldn't. Until there wasn't anything left of me to hurt. The pieces fell into place like stones down a well. A woman driven past endurance. A moment of desperate violence. Men who called it murder instead of justice. How many of them out there, Jake asked. 5, last I counted, led by a man named Pike. He's got papers saying I'm worth more alive. But she shuddered. Pike don't much care about legal niceties. Jake had heard of Pike, a bounty hunter with a reputation for collecting women criminals and taking his time about delivering them to proper authorities. The kind of man who made Jake's skin crawl just thinking about him. Morrison. The voice came again, closer to the door now. Sun's going down. We ain't got all night. Jake made his choice. He walked to Clara and gently took her hands in his. They were small, soft, despite the calluses and shaking with exhaustion and blood loss. I need to see, he said quietly. If I'm going to help you, I need to know how bad it is. Terror flashed in her eyes. Please, no. I'll what? Think less of you. Clara Ara, you killed 3 men who spent years torturing you. Far as I'm concerned, that makes you a hero, not a monster. For the first time since she'd collapsed against his door, Clara looked at him like he might be human instead of just another threat. Slowly, with hands that shook like autumn leaves, she began to lift the blood-soaked fabric of her dress. What Jake saw when she finally revealed her wound made him turn pale as moonlight, just as the title promised. But it wasn't horror that drained the color from his face. It was rage, pure and cold as winter ice. The wound wasn't just a bullet hole or knife cut. It was a brand burned deep into the flesh below her ribs. The letter were for Whitman, marking her as property. But that wasn't what made Jake's hands shake with fury. Around the brand, carved with deliberate cruelty, were dozens of small scars, years' worth of violence written on her skin in a language of pain. Jesus, he breathed. Now you know, Clara whispered, pulling the fabric back down. Now you understand why I can't let them take me back. Jake stood slowly, his face transformed into something hard as desert stone. He walked to the door and threw back the bolt. Morrison Pike's voice carried the confidence of a man holding all the cards. Time's up. Jake opened the door and stepped outside. 5 men sat their horses in a rough semicircle, rifles ready. Pike was easy to spot, the one with the cruel smile and eyes like a dead fish. She's not here, Jake said. Pike laughed. Blood trail says different. Fresh drops leading right to your door. Could be from anything. Cut myself skinning a rabbit. Show us your hands. Jake held up his hands clean and unmarked. Pike's smile widened. Nice try, Morrison. But we got a witness saw her heading this way. Indian tracker says she made it all the way to your cabin before the trail goes cold. Then she moved on in the dark, bleeding like a stuck pig. Nah. Pike dismounted, his men following suit. She's in there, and we're going in to get her. Jake's hand dropped to his Colt. Not happening. The desert went quiet. Even the coyotes held their breath. You know the law, Morrison. Woman killed 3 men in cold blood. Got a price on her head. Dead or alive. I know the law, Jake said. I also know what those 3 men did to her, and I know what you plan to do. Pike's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the predator underneath. What happens between me and my prisoner ain't your concern. Funny thing about that, Jake drawled. See, this is my land, my cabin, my rules and my rules. Say Clara Whitman ain't leaving here with you. The gunfight was brief, brutal, and decisive. Jake had the advantage of cover and righteous anger. When the smoke cleared, 5 men lay still in the desert dust, and Jake Morrison stood alone under the rising stars. He found Clara Ara inside, collapsed against the wall where blood loss had finally claimed her consciousness. But her pulse was steady and her breathing even. She would live. Jake spent the night cleaning her wounds properly, stitching what needed stitching, and burning the bounty hunter's papers in his fireplace. Come morning, he would bury 5 men in unmarked graves and never speak of them again. Clara awoke 3 days later to find herself in a clean bed, wearing one of Jake's shirts, her wounds bound with proper bandages. She was weak but alive, and for the first time in years safe. The bounty hunters, she asked. Gone. Jake said simply, won't be coming back. She looked at him for a long moment, reading truth in his weathered face. Why? Because some things are worth fighting for, and some people deserve a second chance. Years later, folks would tell stories about the Morrison Ranch, how Jake had married a mysterious woman who appeared out of the desert like an answered prayer, how they raised horses and children and never spoke of the past, how Clara Morrison was the kindest woman in 3 counties, always ready with a meal for travelers or medicine for the sick. They never knew about the 5 graves hidden in the desert wash behind the cabin, or about the night Clara Morrison chose to live instead of die. But sometimes when the desert wind was right and the stars shone bright, you could swear you heard the ghost of an old promise carried on the air. Some secrets are worth keeping, and some choices, no matter how hard, are always right. The Morrison Ranch stood for 40 years, a testament to the truth that redemption comes not from forgetting the past, but from choosing to build something better from its ashes.